So I want to review really quickly the Four Noble Truths, which is going to lead us into discussion about the Eightfold Path. You remember Buddha said, I teach only dukkha and the elimination of dukkha. And dukkha was a Pali word that was translated as suffering. I prefer dis-ease or unease, although in many cases it is suffering. And it refers to mental activity. It's not so much that you're sick and you feel bad and your body is messed up. But if you accompany that with, oh my God, how am I going to get the kids? What am I going to do? I've got a big report to write. That's dukkha. And dukkha is always wanting things to be different. You either want to keep something that you like in place, you want to eliminate something that you don't like. We don't like sickness. We don't like old age and death. I'm not going to see Michael McClure in the sunlight anymore. But by the same token, now he is sunlight. He'll come back as the rain. He'll come back as the bird songs. Because he's never not been part of this universe. So getting what we don't want, not getting what we want, wanting things to stay pleasant. These are all the nature of suffering. So the first noble truth was suffering exists, meaning you're not unenlightened if you suffer. You're not neurotic if you suffer. You're not unstable if you suffer. You're not at some lower level of consciousness. This is a human phenomenon that happens to everyone. It's important to accept your suffering because if you don't see it, if you don't see this mental activity, you can't own it, you can't investigate it, you can't change it. The second noble truth is that there's a cause of suffering. Remember, we talked about grasping, holding on to things you like, holding on to what you want, holding on to states. This is a very emotional country we live in. We say, I'm angry. It's like saying the self, myself, the totality of myself is angry. Tibetans say anger exists or there is anger. So desire is a kind of grasping. Aversion is a kind of grasping, pushing away, but it keeps you attached to what you don't like. Ignorance of our connections to the rest of reality, the rest of the universe. It's a big problem. Then there's a truth to the end of suffering. That's the third noble truth, meaning we can learn to let go. When we meditate, we're not trying to stop the mind. We're letting the mind be the mind. But we're putting the mind in our mudra, we're putting the mind in our posture, and when we're completely enveloped in mind, we've stopped the mind. We've stopped it from being a separate thing. I used the expression last week, not one, not two. The mind and the body are not one, and they're not two. And it's like that with everything. And then finally, there is a path to ending suffering. And that path is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is actually a circle. It's written as a list, but they're all interdependent. One leads to the other. So the first training is to identify your suffering, is to identify your anxiety, is to identify your dissatisfactions, to identify your greed. What don't you want to change? Most people have had the experience of being in some incredible event or place in their life, and suddenly the thought comes up, I don't ever want this to end. You know, That's grasping. So Buddha described the Eightfold Path in the terms of right understanding, right speech, right effort. My teacher used the word Buddhist instead of right. Buddha meant right in the sense of correct, but he didn't mean that everyone else was wrong. And in English, right carries a lot of connotation about this is the right way to do it. So I follow my teacher and I say Buddhist understanding, meaning that's the way we Buddhists see it. That's the way we do it. So what is Buddhist understanding? Well, my friend David Chadwick, who's been a student of Suzuki Roshi, has been compiling his archives for 50 years and sharing them around the world. He was once at a lecture when Suzuki Roshi was talking, and he was a favorite of Suzuki Roshi's because he was so intensely authentic. And at this lecture, he said, Suzuki Roshi, you've been talking for 30 minutes and I don't understand a thing you've said. Tell me one thing I can understand. And Suzuki Roshi took the question really seriously. And he stopped and he thought a second and he said, things change. That's the fundamental Buddhist understanding. We can refine it in many useful ways, but that's it. No one has any strong emotional attachment to artificial flowers. They're not dying. They don't have a time span. The fact that we have a time span makes time precious. The fact that we have an end to life as we know it makes that life precious. That's Buddhist understanding. Meditation helps us to develop the strength and allows us to become aware of these feelings and to look at everything and regard everything with the kind of tenderness that we reserve for flowers. It's passing. Even the person you don't like is dying. He fears death just like you do. He runs away from what he doesn't like just like you do. She runs toward what she likes, just like you do. So on some fundamental level, we're all this human animal. So we all have self-awareness. We all have a sense that I'm over here and you're over there. And Buddha refused to answer the question, did the self exist or did the self not exist? But he did say the self was not fixed. And that may be the most important thing that I ever say to you. Because if you understand that the self is not fixed, it means the self is in flux, just like everything else. So over time, we name it, we have a word, the self. I don't know how you think of it. Maybe you think about it as a little walnut with your name on it, tucked under your liver, or a little homunculus behind your forehead doing your seeing and hearing. It doesn't matter. The truth of it is you can't find it. You can't find its location. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a color. So if I tried to sell you a car and I couldn't remember the brand and I couldn't remember where I left it, you'd be a little suspicious. So what I want you to be suspicious about is not that it doesn't exist, but that over the course of your life, we've all been told who we are, what we're like. We imply what we're like by comparing ourselves to other people. But we're really an unduplicatable experience. There's no one else experiencing the moment in exactly the way you do. So in Zen practice, we say, put no head above your own. This is why we don't regard our teachers as gurus. Maybe an uncle, maybe an aunt, someone who's been out there ahead of you. help you when you've got a knot. So looking at the world from the point of view of yourself, which is what we do every day, the whole world is named and nameable. And for all that this gives us, words are important. They're useful. I mean, if I say, go to that tree over there, I don't want to have to describe it from its root system, branches, leaves up just to get you to go pick up the shovel. But there's a cost, because once we have the word, we have a fixed idea. And while it's not impossible, it makes it more difficult to see things fresh and new and immediate. And the same is true with our idea of ourself. Well, I'm going to turn my little timer on, excuse me, so I don't talk for 3 hours and wake up and nobody's here. That's the wrong one. There's my timer, thanks. So it's not that this self is wrong. It's not that the ego is like a critical environmental mistake or something. It has a function. But like everything, it has a shadow. It exacts a tax. So when your mom shook her finger at you and said, "You're always this way," we all believe it. Or when we make the same mistake over and over again, we say, "God, I'm always this way." And over a lifetime, we fix this idea of the self, and it makes change very difficult, because we begin to think about it as something with fixed properties and fixed shape. And one of the reasons that we meditate is to allow it to soften, to allow it to dissolve, to allow our small mind to just keep spinning and spinning and spinning, but by not paying attention to it, by paying attention to our posture and our breath, little by little, we soak into big mind. And in big mind, there are no problems. The answer to every question is there. It's our small mind that doesn't know things. It's our small mind that likes and dislikes, that says, "Oh, Zen is too uptight, man. We got to sit like this. I don't like that. I'm into freedom." I was like that when I came to Zen Center. I had long hair. I'd been living in communes. I'd been shooting too much heroin. And I was, going to give a couple months to Zen and get enlightened, and then I wouldn't have any more problems in life. And I got into the monastery, and it was a horror show. People were not interested in what I had to say. People were quiet. They got up at 5:30 in the morning. They sat still. They didn't move. It made me crazy. And of course, I was crazy. I just didn't know it. And little by little, I began to appreciate what form does, and how by suppressing your personal prejudices and your personal affections and attachments, you actually get to participate in something much, much bigger. So this first Buddhist understanding, this is kind of the core understanding. And it has several parts. So the antidote to this self-centered point of view, like I'm over here and the rest of it's out there, it changes, but I don't, which is a delusion, is Buddha's phrase, dependent origination. Dependent origination means if this exists, that exists. My awareness couldn't exist without my body. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, my senses, the mind that's receiving them and moving them around. So it's not independent of that. So if it's not independent of my body is not independent of sunlight and water and oxygen and food and exercise and shelter and clothing. You just keep taking it out. You take it all the way out. Take it out to Earth's place in the universe. If we were closer to the sun, water would boil off. We wouldn't be here. If we were farther away, water would freeze. We wouldn't be here. So we are dependent. And the dependency is what makes our freedom meaningful. We have very, I don't know, kind of adolescent ideas of freedom as Americans. I get to do whatever I want whenever I want it. It's kind of horrifying watching during the pandemic as deaths are rising in Nebraska, in Michigan, in Iowa. The governors are opening the place up, contrary to all scientific evidence. They're doing that for some other reason, some political reasons. It's kind of horrifying. It's a delusion. The fundamental thing is being alive. From that point, everything is mutable. So because everything is interdependent and dependent on other things, we can't actually say we have a self because it doesn't exist independently. It's not a thing that can be identified, selected, and grasped. It's more like riding a kayak in a river. We don't control it. We use its power. We develop skill to be with it. So with ourself, when we sit zazen, when we practice these forms, little by little, we're bringing it under a kind of gentle discipline. We're teaching it, you don't have to grab everything that comes through your mind. You don't have to believe everything you think. Be intimate with it, see it, accept it, let it go. As Suzuki Roshi says, let your thoughts come and go. You don't have to serve them tea. That's what I put on today's announcement. So accepting that we actually have no self is what liberates us to accept this moment right now as brand new. The person you had a fight with 10 minutes ago is a different person. The mother who yelled at you is different 10 minutes later. And if we can let go of dukkha, if we can let go of all the momentum and centrifugal force of our thoughts whirling around, oh, if she ever says that to me again, boy, I'm going to be so mad. You're out of the moment. You're in the moment when you're following your breath, when you're following your posture, when your mind is attached to this moment. This is the life you have to live. Everything else is a memory or a wish or a hope or a fear. This moment, right here, right now, this is what we get. So Buddhist understanding is the core lens. Now, the next step is called Buddhist thought. Well, one thing means keeping both these understandings afloat. Yes, I have a body. I can look at myself as a separate existence, but it's an arbitrary way of doing things. It's not the only way. It's equally logical to see myself as a part of all of it. Equally logical to say that I wouldn't have this bowl of rice. When I eat this bowl of rice, I'm eating the frogs, the crickets, the marsh, the water, the people that waded in up to their knees and picked the rice and dried it and packed it and shipped it. I'm eating the whole world. That's not false. It's both and, not one, not two. Not just one, and not just all of it out there. Both and, not one, not two. You're not always one way or the other. One of Suzuki Roshi's great books is called Not Always So. And not always so means knowing the next moment is not always so. Buddhists practice not knowing very often, to go into a situation not knowing what's going to happen. Yes, you had a fight yesterday. It's a new moment. And if you go in not knowing, you have the full scope of your spinal telephone, which is plugged into the universe. The back of your head opens onto infinity. It's all out there. And if you don't know, If you don't even know who you are, everything's available. Really. This is where meditation really works. We do 10 minutes. If you can do 20 or 30 once or twice a day, it's better. If you can take a couple days a year and go somewhere and sit all day, 3 or 4 days at a time, you'll really make breakthroughs. And then your daily meditation will just hold that in place. So Buddhist thought reminds us to interrogate our thoughts, interrogate our feelings. Don't believe everything we think. We don't know. We just don't know. So Buddhist speech. It's number 3. Primarily, it's practicing kindness and compassion in speech. We don't inflate ourselves. We try not to. I'm laughing because I've made my living as an actor. And the joke is that, actors are all full of ego and just narcissists and self-aggrandizing. And there's some truth to that. But it's also true, if you've ever worked in the industry, that there's only about 12 people, the biggest stars, who can be that way. The rest of us learn very, very quickly that 99% of your union is out of work at any given time. And if you're hard to get along with, if you're too difficult, there's 12 guys or gals out there who can do the job, ready to replace you. So actors actually are taught humility every day that you go to work. The schedule's inflexible. The food's inflexible. They may pamper you this way or that, but on some level. Now, confession, Buddhist speech. So I was once describing someone to a Zen teacher, a friend of mine, and she said to me, wow, the way you talk about that person doesn't make me want to meet them. That one stopped me. I have a lot of trouble when I talk about Donald Trump. I mean, it takes all of my self-control not to speak badly. This doesn't mean disguising what you see. It doesn't mean forcing yourself not to see. But whether I like it or not, I'm made of the same stuff as he is. I'm a human being. He's a human being. We have the same full spectrum of emotions blowing through us. We've had different experience. My father wasn't in the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not saying apologize for people, but I'm saying to ask yourself. I have a friend who's an Ayurvedic astrologer. His name's Brent Bekvar. And once I was complaining about somebody or something, and he said to me, can you imagine any circumstances in which you might behave in that way? And when I really stopped to think about it, I thought, yes, I could. So this person that I was judging was applying behavior that was available to me in different circumstances. He was using them for different purposes. So one of the things we do when we talk politics, and I plead guilty to this, it's something I struggle with really hard. When we criticize somebody viciously or judgmentally, we're creating a fiction that we don't have the qualities that we're criticizing, that they all exist out there in that person. And this is the way wars get created. When young men are trained in the army, It turns out that it's quite difficult to get most young people to kill. And so they start a ceaseless indoctrination. Nips, Japs, Goops, Krauts, Nazis, Slopes, whatever it is, dehumanizing language so that you become the reservoir of all goodness and virtue, and all the evil is out there. If you want to see who Donald Trump is, watch him come down the steps from an airplane. He holds onto the rail. He looks at each step. He knows he's on television, and it's step, step. He doesn't want to be a fool. And in that minute, you see him as an old, doddering man. And I can have pity for him. I'm not going to excuse his behavior. I'm not going to excuse things that I think are contrary to kindness and compassion. But you can see this is just a man, and that without the full Senate behind him, without all these wealthy people behind him, it's just an old doddering man. So in our speech, we try not to blow ourselves up. We try not to make ourselves better than other people. We understand that in some way, everybody's trying to get along. Or as my friend says, we're all bozos on the bus. So these first three paths all identify and strengthen moral conduct, right? Buddhist understanding, Buddhist thought, and Buddhist speech. So the next one is Buddhist action, right action. So our behavior and our physical acts and our mental acts, which is what thinking is, express our understanding. When we pay less attention to ourselves, we actually have more bandwidth to take care of other people. Everybody's suffering. Everybody's in trouble. We're lucky. Anyone who has a faith or a practice or a discipline is actually lucky. They have something keeping them upright. So, okay, you're okay now. Now what do you do? Well, the surest way to alleviate your own suffering is to help someone else. It just works. It works magic. You see people doing it all over America. Someone will, I did a video yesterday for a big event called You Are Not Alone. And it's run by two women, one of whom is a really good friend of mine that I met years ago. Startlingly beautiful woman. I met walking in Paris. And I stopped to talk to her, and she was just so present and so clear. I brought her home to meet my wife, and we became friends, and we've stayed friends ever since. And this is a person you'd think would not have a problem. She's an actress and just gifted with the kind of looks that, 1 in 10 million. Well, her sister committed suicide. And what she did was she turned her own suffering into creating an organization called You Are Not Alone. And she and her friend, whose name I've forgotten, have invited all these people to come speak. And I was invited because she knows me. It's heavyweight company, Deepak Chopra and these kind of people, quite famous. Anyway, what struck me was that she took her personal suffering and she used it to empathize with all the other people who are suffering. I mean, in the nation right now, 60,000, 70,000 people have died from this pandemic. Another 100,000 die a year of obesity and alcoholism. Another 100,000, 50,000 from gunshots, overdoses. Each of those was a person with a whole network of people who knew and loved them. And she took her suffering and she used it as a springboard to worry about people who were alone and depressed in this pandemic, living alone without comfort, without support. So to me, that's a perfect example of Buddhist action. I would rather make a sandwich and give it to a hungry person than give a speech about hunger to 10,000 people. Because making the sandwich is replicable. You can see it, you can do it. If everybody gave a sandwich to a hungry person, there'd be less hunger. I have a note here. When I'm explaining when we pay less attention to ourselves, I'm saying we try not to dominate the silence, says the guy who hasn't stopped talking for 20 minutes. But it's true. In Zen Center, conversations just lapse. You're talking and suddenly it goes silent. And at first it's uncomfortable. But when you understand that people are actually leaving space for others, yeah, okay, Buddhist action. I'm going to do one more today because we're running long. And this one's a tricky one to talk about. Right livelihood, Buddhist livelihood. This is really hard because we live in a culture that exploits the environment and exploits other people. And that's contrary to kindness and regard for other species and other things. But sometimes we don't have a choice. I had a friend named Peter Blue Cloud who was an iron worker, Mohawk iron worker, a poet, really wonderful artist. And when he moved to the Pacific Northwest, he got work as a logger. And he confronted me once because he knew I was an environmentalist. And he said, "Do you resent me for cutting down these trees?" And I had to really think. Some part of me said, sure, yeah, I do. But he said, look, I have no resources. I have a family. I have a house. This is what I have to do. What I try to do is make a bed of branches so that when these trees fall, they don't break apart. That's the way I tender my respect. So I thought, yeah, that's true. We don't always have a choice. Those people on the meat lines in Iowa and Nebraska, that's their job. The governor saying, if you are afraid to come to work, we're going to take your unemployment money away. These people are in trouble. So I don't blame them because they're cutting up cattle and chicken. They're cutting up cattle and chicken because we're all eating cattle and chicken. And if we all stopped, they'd have to do different kind of work. But usually Buddhists try not to exploit others. We usually try not to intoxicate others. Don't see too many Buddhist bartenders or drug dealers. Most Buddhists wouldn't work in a slaughterhouse, but I've met Buddhist soldiers who've tried to practice compassion even on the battlefield. So it's hard to say. It's hard because there's no pure place to stand outside of all of it. We're all a part of it. I would hope that because I have LED lights in my house and solar panels and I drive an electric car, I hope that makes a difference. But I can't really rest on my laurels. I mean, I live in a 1,700 square foot house by myself. In Guatemala, this would hold 25 people. I'm just by being an American, I use up an inordinate share of the earth. And I have to be responsible for my garbage. I have to be responsible for what the industries do when I buy their products. When I buy a computer and we send the old one to China and kids there are getting cancer from taking them apart, how can I be separate from that? So it means somehow we have to always be trying. We'll never be perfect, but we can try to make our televisions be reclaimed by the manufacturers so that the mercury doesn't get out. We can try to do recycling. We can try to keep pushing our limits, do without plastic. But none of us can afford to be proud and rest on the laurels of being on the top of the pyramid. I just saw a new film where I learned for the first time that to build my computers and to build my cell phones, they're blowing up mountains of crystals as we once blew up coal, blew off the mountaintops. So I see lots of people who consider themselves green because their computers don't make exhaust, their phones don't make exhaust. We're not clean. We're part of all of this. And we all have to do better. The earth is telling us that. Michael Moore just made a really tough film that got a lot of people upset called The Planet of the Humans. And it's about the ways in which our efforts at sustainability are failing and how we're still using more and more fossil fuel and natural gas. And he's not trying to attack anyone. He's trying to say we have to do better. We have to do better. So this is, again, this would lead me to Buddhist effort, but I'll do that in the review next week. I think I'll sign off this week and thank everyone for being here and bow out and say my little prayer, the little 3-line prayer. Do you remember it? Beings are numberless. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Well, that's not the prayer. That's another prayer. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. 2 more times. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace.